Welcome, everyone, to our webinar today. We can get started now. I am Nicole. I lead marketing at divorce.com. I will be the host for our bird nesting webinar today. For anyone who's unfamiliar with divorce.com, we are an online platform that offers divorce services throughout every stage of the divorce process. That includes access to educational resources, paperwork generation, mediation sessions and services, along with assistance in filing. So if you're looking for any of those services, we are here for you. Please check us out at divorce.com. But the purpose of today's meeting is to talk about some unique and interesting ways of co-parenting. Traditionally speaking, when a couple is making the decision to divorce and they're going through separation, both of the parents will have their own house that they'll be living in, and the children will have to go between the houses. That can create some instability for the children. And so the concept of bird nesting is really taking that and flipping it on its head. In bird nesting, the children stay in the home and the parents are the ones who are swapping their time to visit the children. The amount of time you spend with the kids obviously can be specific to your unique circumstances, but it is a somewhat untraditional way of approaching co-parenting. It's been taking off in popularity as more parents are trying to find ways to make the divorce process and separation be as less impactful to the children as possible. We know it's a difficult time. We know that there's a lot of change happening. But with this type of living arrangement, it is trying to reduce the amount of change and keep stability in place. So we are joined today by a couple who have been doing birds nesting for the past 6 months, Amy and Colin Marquis. I'd love if you could introduce yourselves and just give a little bit of background about your family dynamic.
Sure. You want to take it?
Obviously, I'm Colin. That's Amy, and we were married for since 2000, so quite a long time. And we have 2 kids. Our eldest is in college. It's a daughter in college. It was not as impactful to her because she's not here every day.
Yep.
And then we have a son who is 14, freshman in high school, so obviously much more thinking about him when we talked about this initially.
That makes sense. I know one of the considerations when people are deciding if this is the right choice for them is the age of the children. So it's good to understand what that dynamic is for your family. Before we actually get started and hear more about your story, I just want to do some housekeeping. We are very interested in hearing from our attendees. If you have questions about this process, either now or as we go through the couple's story and hear more about the logistics of making this work, please feel free to ask your questions in the Q&A section down at the bottom of your Zoom. We will try to read through them and get to them either in real time if we can, or at the end, or saving some time for Q&A as well. So please take advantage of that, because we know that this is a very interesting type of dynamic that a family can be living under, and I'm sure you all have a lot of questions about how to make it work and if this is right for you. Okay, to get started, why don't we start at the beginning of your decision-making process? How did you first hear about bird nesting?
I think I heard about it. I must have read about it online on social media or something. And, I had been considering, bringing up the topic of divorce for some time. But I think what always stopped me was I just couldn't imagine not seeing my children every day, and just that daily touch point of being a part of their lives on a day-to-day basis, especially my younger one, as Colin mentioned. The older one's off at college, but I was a stay-at-home parent for 15 years. And so even though I'm working now, because they're older and they don't need me quite as much, I'm still there, before school, I'm there after school. I cook dinners every night. You know, I wanted the impact to their experience with us as parents to be as normal as possible, given the huge changes that I was thinking of introducing. And so that was just learning about this idea was a game changer for me, because it made a conversation possible that prior to that idea just was a non-starter for me.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think it's a pretty common concern of parents who are deciding if divorce is right for them, what that will do to their children's day-to-day, how they'll be affected. And so bird nesting really introduces a new type of way to have the children have their life hopefully not be as affected. There's no way to get around it, but I think the aim of this type of living arrangement is trying to reduce any kind of extra change that would be coming into their life. So when you were making this decision, and I'm sure you were kind of figuring out from a logistics standpoint what this would mean, I know your specific situation, you ended up buying a new home. Can you talk us through that process, what you thought about in terms of staying in your marital home, thinking through the finances of what that would look like, and kind of going through that decision-making process of what the right bird nesting setup would be for your family?
Well, before you say anything, I want to give Colin credit, because this was really his brainchild. He came up with this idea, and it really took the idea of bird nesting to the next level for both of us. I think it made it feel, for me, even better than what I had originally learned about.
Yeah, so obviously when you enter into the idea of divorce and so forth, you think about your kids, and then you think about the logistics, like you said. And so you're prioritizing your kids for sure. At the same time, you have to think about how it affects the two adults. And so for me, I thought, it's going to kill me straight out of the gate to not see the kids as much. But I don't want to compound that personally by being in some dark, depressing, tiny little, hole in the wall somewhere across town from where the kids are. And so I thought about the idea of a duplex where we're right close together, but separate. You're not driving even 5 minutes. You're certainly not driving 20 minutes. You're leaving your kids. You're right next to her. So if need be, you can be there in 30 seconds.
Yep.
So it was definitely an enticing idea when I thought of it. Amy liked it too. So it that's how it was born.
Yeah, and I will also say that I think this idea takes, it's sort of an odd thing to talk about in conjunction with the divorce, but the idea of trust and mutual respect and some level of maturity, I think, has to be present to do bird nesting at all, but especially if you're thinking about purchasing another property together. It's just, that's a whole different realm of cooperation.
There is, this is certainly not for everybody.
Right.
Bluntly and absolutely. And that goes for bird nesting in general. But as Amy said, in this particular setup, because, to us, it's a positive to have separation, but not really a lot.
Yeah.
But for some people, that is absolutely not going to work. So it's couple dependent, and it is certainly not for everyone. And as Amy said, I think it starts with, you got to still like each other. It has to be pretty amicable. You have to trust each respect each other. And if that's not there, I don't think it's going to work. I really don't.
Yeah, and we got a few questions about that. I think couples who maybe don't have that level of communication or respect for each other find it really hard to imagine this type of situation. So in speaking to who this could make sense for, I think it's really important to point out you need to have good communication. You need to have a level of respect for this to be an option for your family. As far as the different options themselves, we also got a question around more logistics in terms of co-owning a home. I know you obviously made a new purchase, but for those of you who are considering, there are options where you can continue to co-own your existing home after divorce to continue to make this work for you. Some people will rent another apartment and then trade out their time in that second apartment. Some who have the privilege to do this might have two apartments or take advantage of friends and family that live close by. So there are other alternatives to make this type of dynamic work. You obviously have to assess what's important to you, what your financial situation looks like. And so it's very interesting to hear that you made that decision to purchase a new place together. So that probably speaks to another question that comes up about how long this type of arrangement can make sense. What was that part of your decision-making process? Can you talk us through that?
Yeah. I should say we did sit down with a mediator to map out a whole plan around this that included parenting time and parenting, I don't know what you would call it, but you probably have a term for this at divorce.com, but, just sort of like, how do we approach parenting? What are the rules around everything from, deciding on school related things to how to evacuate for a hurricane. We live in a hurricane prone area. How does that work? And then we talked about finances. We talked about every aspect of, separating. So this was included in that. And I don't know, did you want to add anything?
No, I think that was well said.
We're very familiar with mediation. We offer mediation services as part of our core offering. So we can link in the chat for anyone who wants to go through that process and really discuss what the co-parenting plan can look like. I think it's really important to have that communication up front and set clear guardrails around how you plan to approach this, talk through scenarios of what ifs and, emergency planning. So knowing that that was a part of your plan to have that communication up front, I think is really important for everyone who's considering this to know that that's probably a step you'll need to take to make sure that you have the right expectations with each other. You can make sure that you discuss if you have a difference of agreement and, come to some agreement that makes sense for your individual circumstances. So very interesting to hear that that was the way that you were able to talk through all of the different scenarios. Okay, so now that we've walked through how you came to the decision to do bird nesting, I'd love to actually get into the setting up of the home, right? You've made the decision to do the duplex. What did that look like? How did you talk to your children about this? And then what was the logistics of moving in and establishing that new routine?
So you mentioned communication, and that's a pretty important thing to be good at between the adults, but also with the kids. So the earlier you start to introduce the idea before it's actually going to happen, I think is probably good. And what?
I was going to say, before we talk to anyone about this, our children, I mean, I had already set up a therapist for the children, for my son in particular, and someone that he knew. We've worked with this person before, so it was that person was waiting in the wings for to start sessions with him right after. Just as another means of support in case he felt like there was something he wanted to work through or couldn't talk to us about, or just to give him a place to learn to cope and process everything that was happening.
Yeah, I think
And
that's
full disclosure, our son had a history of anxiety, has been treated in therapy subsequently. So that also factored in. We were concerned about that because of his history. It ended up turning out probably better
Yeah, he's
than
done.
we had worried that it might. So.
Yeah, he's done very well. We're very fortunate that all this has worked out as well as it has.
great. Yeah, that's great to hear. Obviously, this is a driving factor in deciding to want to do this type of dynamic. So it's good to hear that the intention ultimately led to good results for your son specifically. So when you were moving in and starting to come into this new routine, did you have any hiccups? Was there any like misunderstandings or things that you had to learn as you went along? Like, oh, we thought it would be this way, but we're actually learning maybe we need to adjust?
Yeah, I don't know about adjust, but I will say because we've only been doing this 6 months, we're not very far into, the dating part of this scenario. So that I think is going to be our next hurdle to clear. We talk about it openly with each other, and so we have certain ideas around what we're comfortable with and what we're not. For example, we've agreed that partners are not coming back to the nest on either side of the house. That's just not something we're looking to introduce at this point. And you asked earlier about the length of time. You mentioned what different people have. I think different people have different ideas about how long they want to do this. And I hear a lot of people talking about bird nesting as a short-term solution. So maybe it's 6 months to a year as a transition period for children to get used to things before they separate houses. For us, it is like a 4 to 5 year proposition. So just seeing our youngest through high school was our goal. And then at that point, we've agreed to reassess and see where we
Got it. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I know. Very frequent question we got about the duration of this.
We might have a longer time frame than some people who are considering this. It's certainly possible. And going back to what Amy was talking about briefly, about agreeing that we would have potential dates or partners coming back to the house. This again, you have to tailor it to who you are, because some people that would cramp their style. If they would want that freedom, right, to be able to bring a potential date or partner back somewhere. Well, duplex is pretty. It works for us, but there's separation and not a lot, right? So, so that setup would probably not work for some people.
Yeah,
they would want
more privacy.
A separate apartment somewhere, for example.
Yeah, and I do think that privacy is the hiccup that we would say. I mean, that's the hardest thing about this. And for me, I'll just speak from my own perspective that I saw bird nesting as a good compromise. So divorce is very, in a traditional sense, it's very final and separate. You think of it as compartmentalizing a family, or I do. But really, for us, it's a slow burn. It's a I guess, I don't know, a marathon, not a sprint. I don't know how many euphemisms I can use here or metaphors, but it's a slow process, and that's okay, because I get to maintain my day-to-day contact with my children, and that was my top priority. And so I think that's what we both center ourselves on always, whenever there's a problem.
Yeah, that's definitely great advice for people who are going through this. So I want to move into thinking about the future. I know you said you're 6 months into this, you are trying to get to high school to make and reevaluate if this is going to continue to be the right family dynamic for you, or if you change from there. In terms of thinking about like life a year from now or life 2 years from now, like how do you have that communication? Are you checking in with each other about what's working, what's not working? How different is that since you've been in this arrangement? I'm really trying to understand what your communication style looks like in this type of dynamic to make sure that, you know, people understand what it takes to keep this type of arrangement going, or if you're running into any struggles with it.
I'll say this to start, and then I'll be interested to hear what you have to say. But we see each other every single day. So Colin takes our son to school in the mornings. I'm here in the afternoons at home, and I typically start dinner and we eat dinner as a family. And that is for our son's benefit. So, and not that we go out to breakfast on Sunday mornings. Colin comes out to dinners with my family whenever we get together. My parents live close by, so he's included in those things. We've been together for a really long time, and we're friends, and that's not changing regardless of how our marriage looks. So I think that's what has allowed us to do this. That's what's at the center of our ability to continue to communicate and collaborate.
Yeah, I think I said it 10 minutes ago that, in my mind, you tailor it, but in my mind, there has to be a certain level of amicability. You still have to like each other to make this type of arrangement work. Otherwise, it's going to, I don't have the numbers. I'm sure you do at divorce.com, but I would imagine most divorces or pending divorces, oftentimes it's ugly. There's not. The two want to get the heck away from each other, and so, as I said, I don't know the numbers, but I imagine a lot of them are like that.
Yeah.
This is not for.
Yeah, and it's very good, I think, for people to understand up front what level of relationship it takes to maintain and have success in this arrangement. I know you had mentioned, Amy, something about still interacting with each other's parents and how involved they are and how long you've been married. A question that came up is that in-law dynamic, considering there is a change in status of the relationship, but for some, because the home unit might still be intact, that could be maybe confusing, or maybe a time to place some new boundaries. Did you have any conversations with your parents about this new dynamic, or even reactions from friends when you told them that this was going to be your new type of living arrangement?
We regularly get feedback from even our not necessarily my parents, but extended family have plenty of opinions about this. It is far from traditional. A lot of people, and I've had friends, and I think you have too, comment on, this is so weird, or just I don't understand why you would want to do this. There's not enough privacy. There's not enough boundaries. You need to do it this way or that way. They have a lot of opinions on what we're doing, and I find it to be pretty funny because it's working for us. I know it's not traditional, and I know that most people expect us to be sort of like stilted and awkward around each other because of what's happening. And I feel fortunate to have. I still refer to Colin as my partner because that's what he is. He's where our marriage is changing, but we still navigate day-to-day life as partners. We have to collaborate and cooperate every day to make this work. And, I feel fortunate to have a partner who's willing to do this with me. I don't take that for granted. I don't think everybody has that. So I'm very grateful.
Yeah, I would imagine most do not who are in this situation. I obviously agree with Amy, fortunate as well. I'm going to go a step further than what she said. I think most people in our sphere whether it's friends or family members or whatever, are like, "What are you, crazy?" They don't care, and they are uncomfortable with it because maybe they wouldn't perceive that. And that's why I'm surmising that, although it works great for us, people have to take a good hard look at, at where they are and what their dynamic is, and what they're willing to do. Now, this is a child first. You're prioritizing your kid. You are sacrificing a bit, maybe a little more than a bit, for the two of us. And I don't, can everyone do that? No, they can't. Some people can.
Yeah.
But you have to do that sort of look in the mirror and figure that out before you take a step toward this.
Yeah. What I will say, obviously, being in the space, we hear from all different types of couples and the circumstances that are leading them to divorce. And, every circumstance is unique. Every circumstance is different. Part of the reason why we wanted to have you on the webinar today is that there are couples who this could make sense for. And, we did a poll on social in advance of this where we asked if people had heard of this concept before, and 80% had not. So for those who this could make sense for, who have that amicable relationship and respect and have done some of that inward self-reflection of priorities, and, at the end of the day, they want to put their children first, we want to make sure that they're weighing all the options. They understand what is available to them in terms of, post-divorce life. And so we really appreciate you taking the time and talking through that story, because it's super helpful for couples who are a little bit earlier on in their journey and trying to figure out if this is a potential for their family dynamic. We know it's not right for everyone, but it is good to know that at least thus far, 6 months in, that you're feeling like this is working for you. Is that a fair assessment? Yeah. And same for your children too.
I mean, everybody, as much as can be expected in these circumstances, I feel like people in our family are thriving, which is, a really positive word to use in the context of a divorce.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, well, I want to take a moment just to check in with the Q&A. I have seen some activity in terms of people asking questions. Just want to make sure we can address any of them. Let me see here. Okay, this one is very tactical, but we'll ask it just to see what the answer is. So some people are really curious about the day-to-day in terms of buying food and, cleaning the house. What does that look like for you?
Yeah, so that was all part of our mediation process. Our mediator was really great about helping us to map out a plan and think through every aspect of what this would look like. We had some ideas going in. I mean, I had done a little bit of research, but she asked questions that, we hadn't thought of. The hurricane evacuation was one example. But to navigate a two-family household, we basically have 3 bank accounts. One is mine, one is his, and one is joint. And the joint bank account was the result of what the mediator calculated our joint expenses would be in this house.
Very interesting. Yeah, I'm sure that's a helpful piece of advice for trying to think tactically how to make this all work and not, have a difference of opinion or agreement going into it when you're thinking about the finances, because it is just one of the considerations. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say that I think that the mediation was a really important step to alleviating some of the potential disagreements that we could have had, in a situation that was a little bit tense and awkward in the beginning. It just kept some things out of the mix so that we could focus on making everything as easy as possible on our child and then for each other.
On that note, do you have any tips for people who are about to start the mediation process? What types of questions they should go into mediation with, or considerations, like, very down into the nitty-gritty of emergency planning, or high level of what they're hoping to get out of it? Just, I think how to approach mediation is a really interesting topic for people to understand more about.
So in the end, the mediation was helpful because, as Amy said, the mediator is someone who's trained, done it before, is an expert, and so that person is going to think of the things that you will not. So that's the biggest plus, right? If you're the type of person that's even in the realm of considering bird nesting and mediation, we already know that it's relatively amicable, because if you weren't, you're not going to consider those things, right? So what I'm saying is, in the end, what I concluded was we probably could have done what we did in mediation, the two of us sitting in a coffee house with a piece of paper. But that having been said, there would have been things that we would not have thought of. And so that, I think, is the reason to choose, is they will come up with stuff that you hadn't thought of.
Yeah, that's helpful, because for a lot of people, this is their first time going through this process, and what you don't know, you don't know. And so it's a good point that mediators, and, like I said before, we have mediators who are helping through our divorce process. It's so nice to be able to lean on them and their experience, and knowing that, they've been there, done that with many other couples, and have seen the things that you need to consider and make sure that it's raised. So that's definitely a good piece of advice. Okay, so I want to be mindful. We're getting closer to the end of this. Are there any other final thoughts that you have on this topic, things that we didn't get to cover that you want to make sure people take away from this topic, or just in general about going through a divorce?
You want to start?
No, you go.
No, I mean, I think it's, to me, just it's going back to a couple of the points that we talked about already. So, folks who are going down this road and that are interested in this concept of bird nesting, first and foremost, you gotta take a look in the mirror, like we talked about, and have that level of trust and amicability. If that's there, then by all means, it's a good thing to investigate, because it's working great for us. It is a very positive thing, and in our opinion, for the kids, I'm not sure you can beat it.
That's right. Our child psychologist said that, I mean, this was straight from him, so I don't know which study he was talking about, or maybe there was more than one. But the better the parents get along, the easier it is on the children. So
absolutely,
and I can see that in our son, who was diagnosed with clinical anxiety. So I'm not using that flippantly. And he struggles with that. He's learned a lot of coping skills, and he's doing great. But in the face of something as stressful as divorce, and as potentially damaging to a child, he's a walking testament to how well this works. So I would say, if you can center your children in this process and always use them as a touch point, then you can do this successfully. Both of you keep that in your heart.
Yeah. I want to point out, I know you haven't had a chance to look at all of the feedback in the Q&A, but there's been a lot of positive feedback that people are inspired by your story. And I think it's really important what you said about making sure both parents respect each other, treat each other well, because that affects children. And you clearly are a shining example of what that can look like. So I want to close out by saying, appreciate both of you for being here, sharing your story, being a little bit vulnerable for other people to understand what it takes to make bird nesting work, and the considerations that go into living in this type of family dynamic. It was really great to just get to know you both as part of this process. And Amy, I didn't get a chance to say this earlier on, but thank you also for the blog article that you wrote. If anyone is interested, we'll link that in the chat as well. that has some of those stats that you were referencing about some of the benefits that bird nesting can bring to children. So take a look at that. And then I just want to, again, appreciate your participation and thank you for joining. And also everyone else who's here, who's attending virtually or watching after the fact, we also appreciate you joining. We'll try to have more of these in the future.